Hey there, welcome into another exciting episode of Drummer Daily. I'm Daniel. I'm so happy you could join me. This is episode number 182. And hey, before we get started today, just want to remind you, if you want to become a professional drummer, or you're just serious about being a better drummer, even if you don't want to be a professional, I've got some really cool stuff that is completely free over at prodrumacademy.com. So just go there. It's called the Pro Drummer Essentials Bundle. And it includes some drum mixing walkthrough videos. It includes some drumless backing tracks, click track MP3s, some tuning resources. But it also includes Boom Click Bootcamp, which is a 14-day program, video training program where you play along with videos. And if you follow the program and show up for 14 days, you're pretty much guaranteed to get really solid at drumming with a click track, which is a big part of becoming a professional drummer, but I believe it's also part of being just a great drummer. So check that out over at prodrumacademy.com. All right, so today I want to tell you a little bit of a story, and this is something that you may already know about me, maybe you don't, but I've told parts of the story before about how I got my first kind of big drumming gig, my first touring, on a tour bus, kind of big gig. And I kind of want to jump around that story a little bit. I want to kind of tell you before and after that gig. So not during that gig or when I had it, but kind of what happened right before it and what happened after it ended. So before that gig, before I got that gig, I had done a couple of semesters of college, a community college. I was living at home with my parents. So I was 20, I think by that time I was 21 years old or so. I'd kind of gone in and out of community college, not because I didn't have any ambitions or goals or anything like that, but I just knew I really wanted to be a drummer. And the way I'd experienced the music business growing up, living in Nashville, I just knew that for me, getting a degree in music wasn't going to really provide me with any opportunities. I knew enough people already. I had enough connections I had enough friends in the music business that they weren't going to ask me to see a degree before they hired me. And I didn't think anyone was. And so college is good for some people who want to do music, but not everybody. So I was one of those people that it wasn't for me. And so I was living at home with my parents. And I had a job and everything. I wasn't sitting around, playing video games all day and, not doing anything. I was working hard on my drumming, and I also was working a full-time job. I had a couple different full-time jobs during that time. So I was, when I wasn't in college, I was not being lazy or a bum or anything, but I was aware that I was 21 years old or 20 years old, whatever it was, and I was living at home with my parents still, and I was so scared of becoming a punchline or a stereotype, I guess, that I wasn't sensitive about it, but I was aware that if you just were to say out loud the description of what I was doing, it sounded maybe worse than it was. I'm 21 or 20 and I live at home with my parents. Haven't been really to much college. It would sound like someone whose trajectory was not headed upward very much. And I didn't feel like that was true about me, but I just knew that from the outside looking in, people wouldn't understand the specifics of my situation. And I know that everyone always thinks we all think we're the exception to the rule. So I was aware of that too, but I just was so determined not to be that stereotype. And so it helped me stay motivated. But I was still a little unsure about the perception that my other friends who were going to college might have about me. He's kind of not trying very hard. Most of my friends were in college, and we still hung out a lot and still talked a lot. And so I was worried, not worried, it's not the right word. I was aware that maybe some of them thought that Daniel, what are you doing? You're not moving forward in any way. And so I kind of, in the back of my mind, when you have that kind of uncertainty about yourself, you carry yourself a certain way. And so I that's kind of where I was at. And then when I got this gig, this paying, pretty well paying gig at the time for me, gig, and I was going on tour, traveling all over the world, doing tour buses, doing all this whole thing, it was like validation for and justification for what I had done up to that point. That in a way, I was proving to all my friends, hey, you know what? Like, look, I made this thing work. I did have a goal, and I achieved it, and I am who I said I was, that kind of thing. And so right after I got that gig, I noticed that I felt more confident just overall. I carried myself a little differently. I wasn't arrogant or anything like that, but I was aware that I had successfully achieved what I set out for, and I was doing the thing that I dreamed of doing. I was who I wanted to be. I was achieving what I wanted to achieve. The problem with that was that over time, that blended or transformed into me completely, because I felt like something was I hadn't arrived yet. And then when I got this gig, I had arrived. So what happened was, throughout the time of having this gig, I started to tie in my identity with what I was doing. So I went from just being me, and you know, me being the guy that I am, or being funny or kind or whatever it was, to me being a professional drummer. And that's who I am. I'm a professional drummer. I travel the world, and it's like, I walked with my head a little higher, or felt a little bit more comfortable with everything. I wasn't scared anymore, or worried that I'd had to explain more about myself. If someone said, "Hey, what do you do?" I didn't have to say, "Hey, I live at home with my parents and work at a warehouse or whatever." I could say I'm a professional drummer, and all of a sudden now I didn't have to worry about explaining more of my situation. I could just say it, and it was impressive. And I realized that I didn't at the time, but now I realize that I had put all of my stock, so to speak, into drumming. I had put all of who I was into not only just drumming, but also the fact that I was getting paid to do it with a successful artist. I was doing a relatively high profile gig, so I thought that I was something great. And that feels fine at the time, because you think that you're always going to have it. But what happened to me is that I got fired from that gig. And when I got fired from that gig, a year later, or however long it was, all of my identity was taken away, because all of my identity was in that gig. I was that drummer. I was doing that thing. And so when it all got taken away, it was like, well, who am I? Because I was all those things, but someone else was able to take that away from me just by firing me from a gig. And for a while, the only way, I was so determined to get another gig right away, because I needed to get back who I was. And that, again, I've said this before, but if you're desperate and you're trying to be a musician, those things do not go well together. Being a desperate musician, desperation comes out in everything. Comes out in your playing, comes out in how you talk to people, comes out in how you interact, comes out in how you're motivated throughout the day. You never want to be desperate and be a musician. So I was so desperate to get that back. And in fact, after I got fired, I actually got really, really sick, physically sick, and was sick for a couple of months. And I know now that it had to have been all from the stress and the anxiety of losing my identity because I lost a gig. And so it's taken me a while, and I read a book a few years ago, Don Miller, or I think he goes by Donald Miller now, but it's called Scary Close. And it's a book about, he just basically went through a process where he said, basically, what if I decided that relationships matter more than anything else, and that I am enough? And what if every single person doesn't have to be famous? That was my takeaway from the book, was what if I don't have to be the most famous drummer in the world? What if I don't have to be the most successful drummer in the world? Not because I've lost my ambition and I am throwing in the towel, but what if my identity is not wrapped up in the achievement that I may or may not perceive? What if being important to 1,000 people or 10,000 people or 10 million people is not nearly as important as being important to my wife and my son and the people right around me? What if I can just be a good dad or a good husband? What if those things were more important? And the other things are fun and they're important to me, but what if it was enough for me just to have an impactful relationship with a few people closely around me? And I never looked at it that way from the perspective of, I always thought that in order for me to have achieved my life's work, that I have to be famous so that I can impact a bunch of people. What I didn't realize is that pretty much everyone wants to be famous or rich or whatever. And so, and everyone's not going to be that. And I don't believe that if you're not famous or you're not successful, that you don't matter and that you're not impacting people and you don't maybe have a bigger impact on people than a lot of famous people do. But I just never had been kind of put in my face that way. We're like, wait a minute, I don't have to be this big deal in order to matter and actually consider my life a success. And so I'm not telling you not to pursue drumming. And I definitely am still being a drummer. And we even talked about how I've kind of temporarily at least retired from the road, from touring. I decided that. And part of that was I've realized that being a normal person is actually really gratifying for me. And I'm not telling you not to pursue drumming, but what I'm saying is I think that everyone should strive to identify and be comfortable with themselves apart from what you do. If you can't find fulfillment in your relationships and who you are, don't put your identity in something that can be taken away. At the end of the day, a drumming gig is just a job. And jobs can be taken away, jobs come and go. And you don't want your identity to come and go on the whim of someone else who holds that in their hands. So I just want to encourage you today that if you're pursuing drumming as a profession, make sure you take a step back and really look at yourself from maybe a third-party lens, or objectively look from the outside looking in and say, is too much of my identity wrapped up in this drumming thing? What if that goes away? And if you decide that too much of your identity is wrapped up in drumming, then look at some ways that you can maybe take a step back from that. One thing that I would suggest, a very tangible thing, is to find a hobby. So for me, drumming is not a hobby. And for many of you listening, I know that drumming is not a hobby. And I'm not suggesting you turn it into a hobby and you stop pursuing it as a profession. But if you have nothing else to do or you're not trying to make a living off of it, find something. For me right now, my hobby is baking. I actually really enjoy baking breads and making cakes and things like that. It's a very kind of weird thing, I think, not common, but that's what I enjoy doing. And I specifically picked something I wanted to learn and have fun at and get better at, that I'm not trying to sell to someone else. So if you're trying to be a professional drummer, find a hobby and do something else that doesn't have all that pressure, all that baggage associated with it. And you might find that some of those other things are good places I would not suggest you put your identity in anything outside yourself, but if you're going to, put it in something that can't be taken away. No one can take away my baking from me. And no one can take away me just playing drums. But if I start to wrap my identity up in the profession of it, that's when you get into trouble. And so I just want to encourage you to stay away from that and find other paths. And incidentally, I think tomorrow's episode, we're going to talk about something similar. But I'm going to wrap it up today. This episode's gone a little long. But I want to thank you for joining me on Drummer Daily, and we will talk again really soon. Bye for now.